Welcome everyone to Political Paradigm. I'm Terry Ikumi. We're continuing the conversation around Nigeria's development 65 years after. And this time we're going to pay particular attention to northern Nigeria. I'm joined by a former presidential aspirant, an economist, a man with over 40 years of experience in various sectors, specifically banking, as well as oil and gas. Mr. Mohammed Hayatudeen, welcome to Political Paradigm.
Thank you, Terry.
How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good under the prevailing conditions, in a world that is very difficult, in a nation that is going through a major transition at this point in time.
Well,
but we thank God for life.
I can imagine. So I started this conversation where I'm trying to sustain discussion on Nigeria's development over time. Mm-hmm. And I think this is quite interesting because as we celebrate 65 years, the northern region recently had its Northern Nigerian Investment Summit, and you delivered a paper there talking about how the North can harness technology. But let me begin by asking you the reason behind that summit.
So the reason behind that summit, I think, is fairly self-evident in the sense that Northern Nigeria has gone through a very, very difficult period. Over the last 15 years, majorly because of one, the insecurity that pervaded that environment from about 2010. Second, because of massive economic deprivation arising from a fairly difficult governance environment. Three major issues to do with demographics in terms of population explosion, lack of education, lack of healthcare, youth disempowerment, out-of-school children of almost 20 million and counting today. So much of the region in many places has become ungovernable space. And on account of that, the Northern Elders Forum, which actually was responsible for organizing this summit, felt that even though its core mandate since its inception has been focused on issues pertaining to political leadership and governance, decided that the economic problems were just too overwhelming, and hence the decision to begin to focus seriously on the economy of Northern Nigeria. Consequently, they now decided to host this summit and to invite me as a guest speaker.
For some persons, Nigeria talks too much. There are several summits that hold across the country, and some would say that it never translates into action. What are some of the takeaways from this summit, and what are your concerns around the implementation?
Okay, so that question is relevant in the sense that one, the summit was brought about because Northern Nigeria is heavily underperforming. Two, for the North to actually understand its strengths and weaknesses. And in terms of the strength, we have to look at the factor endowments. Essentially, I would say mining, agriculture, manufacturing, and power. In the field of agriculture, Northern Nigeria has been dominant. It's been the food basket of the country. It's declined substantially. Mining is not well organized. It's been quite haphazard and fragmented. Power, we have a natural strength in power on account of the fact that that's the sun belt of the country, more or less. And we also have a lot of dams, ample rainfall in many parts of the north. So it's important to actually harness all of that and bring all of these things into one ecosystem to try to harness these potentials. So that's number one. Number two, it is very important to take into cognizance the fact that these things in and of themselves cannot actually deliver on our goals without satisfying certain basic conditions. First is that the government and the private sector need to work together to form golden bridges of collaboration. Second, Northern Nigeria itself is actually divided into 19 states. Each one of these states actually pursuing its own goals without looking at very important centers of collaboration and coordination. So you need one cohesive set of plans from which the states themselves can draw their own individual plans. So you need to coordinate policy, you need to coordinate initiatives, you need to coordinate programs so that you have a regional perspective. Keep in mind that Western Nigeria had actually developed what they call the Dawn Project. And they developed a commission with a common secretariat. And today the Southwest is actually moving in leaps and bounds, whereby they came together under a regional platform in order to pursue important regional development initiatives. Odua investment, which many years ago was a basket case, has undergone major reorganization and rehabilitation, and is right now on the map, delivering very important economic outcomes to the people of the region. What the governors have decided to do is that although each one of them is actually running in individual states, they felt that coming together as a collective will best serve their interests. And that's why the North actually has to go back to its founding principles and begin to do the kind of thing that the Western Nigerian governments are doing. Number three, technology is a very powerful tool that we need to use technology as a powerful leverage in order to deliver development to all the nooks and crannies of the North. To be able to do that, you require broadband service of a type that we've never seen before. And only the other day, the Minister of Communication was saying that they were going to raise about $2 billion of funds in order to ensure that all the 8,884 wards around the country are fully covered by this broadband spectrum. Once you have that, then you have the tools that you require.
Okay.
And the fourth thing, obviously, is power. If we can generate power through renewable energy, using the power of the sun, the water tables that we have, and so on and so forth, then I think you can combine all of these sources of power to ensure that we're able to power the economy of Northern Nigeria. But most importantly is people. People are so critical, and we have millions of youth whose brains are actually like sponge. They can quickly actually adapt to new knowledge and innovation and use these very powerful digital tools in the age of the internet and AI to actually become sources of generating, prosperity for the entire region. So these are some of the platforms that need to be used.
I'm curious when you mention the youths, because I know that education is a major factor in trying to achieve some of these things that you've mentioned. I don't know if the summit took into consideration that factor, considering the number of out-of-school children in the North. And then secondly, when you talk about each state coming together, because we know we've had the governors meet from time to time, and I don't know if the summit also took into consideration the peculiar challenges of the various states along with the resources which they have. Security is a major problem in the North, but not all of Northern Nigeria is experiencing that insurgency level of insecurity. Were all these taken into consideration?
Okay, so I think we need to, it's binary in the sense that if you look at the issue of education, yes, there are millions who are out of school children, but there are many other millions who are actually equipped with education but cannot find jobs, and who are very amenable to change, and they can jump on that change curve very, very quickly and deliver. And in the technology space, as you very well know, our own little children who are 3, 4, 5 years old what they can do is a marvel compared to what we can spend 5 years trying to learn. So that's not a difficult terrain for them at all. And one of the major recommendations of the summit is that much of the emphasis on education should be on vocational education, but more importantly on STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, because this is where the future is. Then I think you asked a secondary question in relation to
peculiar challenges and resources.
Yes, individual states may have their challenges, but I think they are stronger when they come together, so that each of these states has its own set of strengths and weaknesses. If they can combine their forces to ensure that they allow certain states or group of states to focus on areas of their competitive advantage, and then where there are weaknesses, they combine their resources to overcome the overwhelming set of weaknesses together, that will serve better. Because my own take as an economist is that quite a few of the states, in and themselves, are not able to build to scale if they are left alone to do it by themselves. But when they come together, they can build better and build bigger in my view.
But how does this summit fit into the national structure? Or is this an isolated thing for just the North?
Not at all. We're actually part of a federal structure. And, the country comes first before anything else. But within the country, under the Constitution, states and local governments are given freedom of navigation to focus on areas where they can actually have the freedom to do what they like, both in the social and economic sphere. So this is consistent with our national goals and aspirations. And the federal government has certain areas, what we call the exclusive list. Then there's a concurrent list. Yeah. And then there are areas that are left for the states and the local governments alone. So my view is that the federal government sets the tone, sets the overall national goals and objectives, develops the national development goals, develops the national budget. Then they sit down under the National Economic Council together with the states to harmonize these things. So if you like, you have, the federal government actually setting the stage for the plans and developmental goals of the states and local governments to actually fit into the national aspirations. And all of these are then harmonized to produce a single plan. So there is nothing that I said in my speech as the keynote speaker that detracts from the need to actually align, both the federal, the states, and the local governments in terms of their development aspirations.
Okay, so this brings me to the conversation around the NESG. It's interesting that all these conversations are holding just about the same time. I don't know whether it's coincidence or not. But before we talk about the NESG, I think this also fits into the global conversation of what's happening the world over now. The world is changing since Trump's second term in office. Countries are realigning their policies and trying to adjust in a way that they benefit regardless of what the outcomes are. Are we adjusting accordingly?
So I think you are raising a very, very powerful and important point here, because we need to go back in time to look at 1914 and 1945, coinciding with the First and the Second World Wars, respectively. Before these times, nation states in Europe and in other parts were not governed by fundamental rules of international engagement. You had kings, queens, and princes who could at will enter any territory and take it over, with a lot of bloodshed and a lot of collateral damage. Cutting it short, after 1945, after the Second World War, it was decided, led largely by the United States, to create a new international order, under which a number of multilateral institutions were then established. These were the United Nations, to bring nation states together to promote stability and inclusiveness and egalitarianism amongst all the nation states. The World Bank to promote investments to bring about development mostly in developing and emerging countries on terms that are very, very generous to allow them to come up. The International Monetary Fund to bring about global financial stability and to help nations which were facing temporary balance of payments difficulties. The World Trade Organization to reduce tariffs as much as possible to foster trade and investment. And the World Health Organization to engender those things that will allow countries to collaborate on epidemics and pandemics and promote better health around the globe. NATO, for example, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, was to bring about the defense and security of Europe and America itself. Fast forward, there was then globalization, which further entrenched these things in the early 2000s. Fast forward, we then came to a new era in 2025, when America actually decided to retreat from the world. And when Europe is now being asked to actually fend for itself when it comes to security, which is why you see things happening in Ukraine, Russia, etc., etc. The United States has cut back development aid in a very big way, and nobody can actually fill that gap. It has withdrawn from the World Health Organization. It has withdrawn from the Paris Accords when it comes to climate change and all that. These are huge, and I guarantee it will take at least 20 or 25 years for the world to actually adjust to this new phenomenon. And so everybody is running around, virtually helter-skelter, trying to understand this new set of forces that are actually reshaping the globe. You can speak to the best experts around the room. Nobody can tell you where this is exactly going to land. Superimpose on that America's trade and investment policy with regards to tariffs and all that. Only day before yesterday, the President of the United States threatening China with a new 100% tariff because China says it's either slowing down or stopping its exports of precious minerals and all that. So we're in a very, very difficult situation. What does it mean for emerging countries? What does it mean for Africa? What does it mean for Nigeria? This is our country. And I'm sure the government might be thinking about this. But the impact for science and technology, for innovation, for health, because of the cutback, for development aid, for education, for trade and investment, and also immigration, on visa issues and other, we have tons and tons of Nigerians in various countries around the world is huge. So what we need, in my view, is a strategic response to these things, for us to become more self-dependent and more self-reliant, rather than looking out for those traditional paradigms. We need a new paradigm of thinking. And I think people both in the public and the private space, and the NGOs, need to think seriously about the impact of these developments on the continent, on the sub-region, and also on Nigeria itself. It's quite profound, in my judgment.
But what would we do? What would we do? I mean, self-sufficiency is key because of the adjustments, the global adjustment now from the U.S. pulling out from all these. So when you say that we must look inward and find a way around it, what sort of policies do you expect to see? And I ask this because Nigeria's foreign policy has been largely Africa-based.
Well, the adjustments are on several tracks. One starts with the basic understanding of what is going on. If you don't understand in a very profound way what is going on, you cannot even begin to understand what solutions to offer. So that's at the primary level. The next thing is to understand what is the impact across a broad spectrum of forces or issues, what impact is it having on the country, both in terms of our social fabric and in terms of our balance sheet, because these things are being taken away. And what do you do in a very sensitive area like health and education? How do you deal with the next epidemic? You know what Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is doing in the health space in America? How do you cope with that, and how do you protect yourself? And what kind of alliances are you going to build through the BRIC countries, through the African Union, and through other agencies and organs, whatever is remaining of the UN agencies, in order to actually inoculate yourself against these shocks? And what kind of envelopes are you going to put in place to deal with these kind of things when they come up? The same thing with climate. So that's the second thing. So you need a new collaborative framework for understanding these issues, for understanding the impact, and frame solutions on how to deal with it. There are a number of very important foundations, like the Bill Gates Foundation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You now even need to get closer to them in order to work out solutions that will protect our people who are very, very vulnerable. AFTA is important, the African Continental Free Trade Area. It means that we now need to ramp up the kind of trade and investment flows that need to take place amongst ourselves, and to open up Africa more in terms of transportation, logistics, trade, investment, etc., so that we will know how to live as a community of interest within Africa. Southeast Asia is doing that. Other continents are doing that. I think if we do not know what is hitting us now, in 10 years' time, I think we're going to be in very deep trouble.
I think that is where investment comes in, I believe, because I think the government is talking about foreign investment now. And that would lead me to the Nigerian Economic Summit Group. You are really economy-based as far as that group is concerned, and you're a founding member of that and chairman. You recently had your summit, and in the light of all these, where does the NESG stand?
So the NESG has been in existence for 31 years. It's the foremost private sector think tank that has been singularly focused on sustainable long-term economic development in Nigeria by focusing purely on market-oriented reforms anchored on deregulation, liberalization, and free markets. But while doing this, to keep a very sharp eye on the social safety net. We achieve our aims by building bridges between the government and the private sector, and the private sector and civil society organizations. In doing all of this, we also bring together international institutions, our development partners, think tanks around the world, donor agencies, NGOs, etc. So the NESG has actually grown in leaps and bounds over the last 31 years. There is no other institution that can actually rival the NESG in terms of the quality of thought, the quality of institution building, and the contribution that we made to this society and this economy. If the NESG was not there, and I say this without contradiction, market reforms could not have happened in the 1990s and the early 2000s. We have been the prime engine that has motivated and encouraged governments, and gone further to develop a national blueprint under the aegis of the Vision 2010 program in 1996. And since then, there have been other visioning exercises. That was a very robust blueprint for actually to get Nigeria moving and to get it hitched to the global trade. So we've done quite a lot. Our position right now is that we are going through a major transition program. The Tinubu administration has been in office for a period of about 2.5 years. We have monitored and tracked very, very closely the kind of reforms that they're carrying out. The reforms have been good in terms of sucking out arbitrage and rent from the system. But at the same time, my own personal opinion is that if there had been better sequence and order from the beginning, in terms of understanding the nature and the dynamics of risks that we will confront in terms of hardship on the people, we could have actually done the two at the same time by making sure that we had planned it, put social safety nets in place first, and then sequence and order those reforms. But it is done. The question is, what do we do? What we need to do is to take all those actions which are capable of clearly comprehending the nature and the scope of the pain and the sacrifice that the people are making. And second, to come up with very durable and credible solutions that can quickly lift people out of the current hardship, lift people out of poverty, and do all those things that will allow us to actually rebuild both our society and our economy in a very deliberate, methodical, and comprehensive fashion. It will take time, but the people need to clearly understand how long it will take to actually take us out of this to the sunshine.
We've seen economies grow in 20 years. Now, while we speak about the state of Nigeria and the light at the end of the tunnel, how optimistic are you that in 20 years from now we would see improvements? Because every time we speak about this issue, the question is, how long will Nigerians wait before they begin to feel the impact of these policies, which several have lauded? Even the World Bank has said policies are good, but at least 139 billion people are still living in poverty. That's been disputed by the government. But translating policies to actual results for people, tangible results for people, how long do you think that this will take?
So let me give some backdrop. You are quite right about China, about Malaysia, Singapore, South Korea, Rwanda. After the genocide, for example, it took them no time. It's a small country, but it's right there on the world map. And it's become a magnetic field for bringing in investments. Again, leveraging a lot of leadership and technology and mobilizing resources. And also unifying everybody under the flag, or rallying people around the flag. With regards to this country, I can relate my experience to you. Quite honestly, I stand to be contradicted perhaps, if I do remember accurately. Most of the problems that we've encountered in the past, in terms of peaks and troughs, whenever we went into a trough, we had a blip. Typically, it's about 3 years, 4 years. And whoever the government was, whether it was a military government or civilian government, would tell you that they will own up and say we're actually going through a major crisis. It's a temporary short-term crisis or it's a medium-term crisis. We will take you out of it within 3 or 4 years. And the institutional capabilities and the levers were there, both within the NGO space and the private space, private sector space, to actually monitor and track these things. So we all collaborated with the governments of the day in order to deliver. And you look through that dark tunnel, you can see that clearly in a year, 2 years, 3 years, or 4 years, we're actually out of it, into the sunshine again. This has consistently been my own experience from childhood to date. From 2007 to 2027, we mark 20 years, roughly. President Yar'Adua, unfortunately, got stricken. And he died young, after roughly about 2 years in office. Since then, Obasanjo had a very good run between 1999 and 2007, there's no doubt about it. President Jonathan enjoyed very high oil revenues and certain institutions of government also worked. But unfortunately, there were lots of leakages at the time. I happened to be on President Buhari's transition committee, so I had access to the numbers in terms of the balance sheet and the cash flow of the country during that period. In a nutshell, what I'm saying is that from that time up to this time, it's been one rolling crisis after the other. And the defining theme was the poverty index, but most especially the insecurity in the country. From 2010, the insecurity that has ravaged this country is just simply unquantifiable. It's sucked the confidence of people. We have shed so much bloodshed, and investor confidence has been at an all-time low. There are many parts of this country that are clearly ungovernable. If you take out, the government has control over the core centers like Abuja, Port Harcourt, probably Kano, Lagos, etc. There are many patches of this country that are extremely difficult to govern at this point in time. So it's a thing of major frustration to me that by 2027 we would have gone through a very difficult patch, almost from 2007, at the risk of exaggerating, that we went through a very, very dark patch where people feel really very hopeless. Things are being done, some reforms are being undertaken, the results are yet to hit. And so as far as the common man is concerned, even for you and I, we are facing a lot of difficulty in our companies and in our homes. So this has been the longest span. Can we come out of it? Yes, we can. It requires everybody to play their part, for the government to govern properly and responsibly, to ensure that leakages are completely stamped out, ensure that democratic space is open for all to participate in, to build a very strong and resilient economy that caters to the welfare of the Nigerian people and that enhances the quality of life. And most importantly, people tend to put a lot of blame on the federal government alone, because the entire beam, the light is actually beamed continuously on the federal government at all times. But there are 37 states and the FCT. There's a lot happening at the state level that is totally unsatisfactory, in my view. And there's a lot of room for improvement. Much of what you see by way of banditry, etc., are actually under the control of the states. If they deliver to their people and husband their resources, efficiently and effectively, and send children to schools and do what is right for them and for people, you're unlikely to face this problem. So I think it takes the collective, in terms of the local governments, the states, and the federal government.
So it's a foundational problem, because you just talked about sending children to school. And since we're 65 years in, you are 7 years older than Nigeria as far as independence is concerned. I would like to get your understanding of something, because I want to paint a picture of how things were before independence and what they are now. What are your fond memories from your early years before independence and after independence? And what do you think has changed over time?
So, before independence, we were under a colonial government. Nigeria was a very small country, not in terms of land size, but more in terms of the population. The colonial masters more or less replicated the kind of governance systems that existed in Great Britain. 2, they were very, very careful and deliberate about how they governed various parts of the country. They spoke to the local peculiarities of each of the regions and then came up with a system of government that actually spoke to those peculiarities and aspirations. And number 3, by the time they amalgamated this country, it was fairly clear what it is they wanted to achieve. They had trained the best and the brightest as core public servants and got them to rise through the ranks. And the economy functioned and functioned at its peak. Even though there was a lot of import substitution, much of what we did here was actually production of raw materials which was sent out to factories in Europe, processed as finished goods and brought here. Move forward, independence. At independence, we inherited a very, very strong civil service. And if I remember correctly, at one time, I think it was Lord Lugard who had said, or is it the British Foreign Office that said that in the Commonwealth, the Nigerian civil servants are the very best, including even that of Britain. The Nigerian public servants stood out, shoulders and above any other Commonwealth country. This continued into early 1960s, right up, I believe, to the end of the Babangida administration, and even beyond. Those public servants delivered services of quality and distinction. However, one thing that actually made us slide backwards was that where countries like Libya, Saudi Arabia, and other countries that were earning a lot of money from oil and gas were diversifying their economy, we were actually filtering those resources away. And we became a huge nation that was a center of consumption. And oil is an enclave economy. Most Nigerians haven't been done oil free to see what it looks like. The oil is produced, is exported, the refined products are brought back. We did not use those phenomenal resources in order to develop and diversify the productive base of this economy. That, I think, was a major thing that actually led to other issues. Coupled with that is political instability, in the sense that you had a series of changes of government from the 70s right through until 1999. And there were also policy inconsistencies. You develop a policy, you don't allow it to gestate for a reasonable amount of time for it to take root. The next government comes in after 2 years or 3 years, and then we pivot and change direction. All these things have been contributors. Lastly, our value system. Those core Nigerian values are empathy, family, decency, honesty, have been shred to pieces. And we lost our humanity. How else can you actually explain a bunch of 17, 20-year-olds carrying AK-47s, sophisticated weapons, and improvised, explosive devices, maiming and killing tens of thousands of people for no cause, simply because they lost their humanity, they're on drugs, they rape young girls, kill women, kill children, dispossess them of their holdings and their farms and their settlements. So the erosion of values has taken a huge impact on the soul and fabric of this country.
And take it from this last part of the values, because repeatedly I've heard that. But interestingly, no one has been able to conclusively say that we can get back to our values.
It needs steady, consistent, honest, empathetic leadership. A leadership that is not interested in taking a penny out of the system, that is willing to roll up its sleeves, to dig in the trenches, and lead by the power of their own example. And it's not one person. I can tell you sitting here today that given where Nigeria is, you require nothing more than 1,000, 2,000 people who are virtually of the same stripe in terms of their colors and their DNA, who believe in the same set of ethos, who are there to sacrifice themselves for the sake of this country so that you, who are the younger ones, and those behind you can live a better life. That is the only way. It's not about the president or the governor. You know, each of these major centers of power requires 500 people who actually think and act like them, who are actually better than you as the president or the governor, so that you can provide serious, purposeful leadership to this country. Without that, it's actually very, very difficult. But the country has gone down and down and down. It's a difficult proposition. It requires the very best of our imagination and skills, and we need to be very serious about it. It's not enough to go to churches and mosques to go and pray for God. God has already come to our aid. He's asking you, the Nigerians and the collective, to actually stand up and do what is right by God. It's all in the scriptures. If you just follow the scriptures and follow those examples, we'll get there.
You talked about the civil service and how good it was. I've spoken with a number of people in recent times who have said that the problem with Nigeria now is the civil service. It's the quality of civil service has deteriorated. What do you think went wrong?
The political space. The civil service have their political masters. Because there are people who are actually, whether it's the military or the civilian, there are people who are either appointed to office as military leaders or civilians as elected officials. They're actually supposed to give the vision, the guidance, and the direction. And the civil servants will be required to then fall in line to carry out that mandate. Even today, many of the civil servants are actually very well trained. But the cankerworm of corruption as self-interest does not allow them to do what is right. You'll be amazed to see throughout my career in banking and in others, you'll be amazed to see the number of people in the public service who actually know their onions, or in foreign service. They could be as good as any you can find anywhere in the world. But where there's no example from above them, and where they see voracious behavior on the part of the politicians, and they don't get guidance or direction or motivation, they will then show the politicians that they actually know how to do it better than them.
You talked about countries diversifying. As an economist, how would you assess Nigeria's efforts to diversify? And I say this all the time, that the one area that Nigeria has, successive administrations have repeatedly talked about to diversify is agriculture. But then it's been hampered by insecurity. So what's your overall assessment of Nigeria's efforts to diversify its economy beyond oil?
So we've been talking about this for a very long period of time. Again, I think it's the oil economy, you know, the intoxication of those petrodollars has prevented us from forcing us to actually do what is right for the people. At one time, oil contributed a large chunk of our GDP and still contributes about 90% to our export revenues. So that tells you something about diversification efforts. Non-oil exports do not contribute much. In terms of the structure of the GDP, today agriculture and services are the largest contributors to GDP. So it's displaced oil considerably in that sense. But when you translate that into exports, it's not a whole lot to write home about. So we've seen a lot of modernization in services, in agriculture and in the creative economy, in terms of entertainment, tourism, culture, etc. But those in and of themselves are not enough. I think you started on the right note by suggesting that agriculture is big. Agriculture continues to be very, very big in this country. And I think what we need to do is, one, to create the linkages that are required in agriculture, from primary products to processing to manufacturing and then exports. Second, to embark on major land reforms that are aimed at making sure that subsistence farming in and of itself is not sufficient. For somebody having half an acre or 1 acre, to create and build at scale is simply not possible for a country of 240 million people. What you need is actually carry on major land reforms and embark on major commercial agriculture of the type that the colonialists had done in places like Kenya, Uganda, etc. Then you can actually build very, very big. Second is marketing, transportation, logistics. Even if you produce, if you do not have cold storage systems and you do not have very efficient transportation systems that links you to other parts of the globe for you to be able to actually export tomatoes from Kano, for example, all the way to Singapore within 48 hours. And it's done. Rwanda does that, a number of other countries do that. If you don't do that, then half of your harvest is actually lost before it leaves the farm. Incentivization is very, very important. Right now, most of the subsidies in agriculture have been taken out. There is actually no nation that can actually promote agriculture as a major endeavor and as a major export without actually helping farmers. There's a lot of gridlock in the system in terms of road infrastructure from the rural areas all the way to the seaports. So power is critical. So all of these things need to come together. And broadband is very, very important. We have to utilize our dams, irrigation, etc. So all of our toolkit need to be mobilized and brought to bear on that space.
You're very big about industrialization, improvements in technology and all, but some would say that Nigeria is just a consumer of technology. Do you think that that Nigeria has over time invested or is investing well in technology?
As a matter of fact, we've been behind the curve for a very long period of time. As far back as probably 1990, a country like Singapore, remember back in the day, clearance at the port shop could take you about 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks or 2 months. Singapore, as a city-state, relied very, very heavily on two things. On shipping, it became a hub, a destination. It also relied on building factories where you just come in and plug and play. That was a source of competitive advantage. Singapore at one time could actually clear goods within 7 days. After about 9 years, it moved to 24 hours and then 12 hours. Anything that comes can actually be cleared out of the port within that period of time. Nigeria has been totally unserious about this. In recent times, in the private space, young boys and girls have set up a legion of businesses that are driven by technology. It's now begun to creep into the government space by having e-government, e-payment, etc., etc. But we're still way behind. The current government, at least based on its pronouncements and its policies, is trying to put a lot of momentum behind that. And we'll wait to evaluate it and see the results within the next 2 or 3 years. And whether we like it or not is something that the rest of the world is not going to wait for us. More importantly, in the area of artificial intelligence, many of these advanced countries and emerging markets are taking a quantum leap. By the time they get far within the next 1 or 2 years, Nigeria will, if it is not careful, unless it follows those footsteps very, very quickly, we can become a relic. They will no longer produce motor cars, for us, for our market. And we can't use the kind of motor cars they produce because they're all, they're significantly advanced. That, I think, is the challenge. The world can actually leave us behind. I think the government is aware, it is sensitive, and I think it has even gone ahead to look at the issue of artificial intelligence and gone to the UN or some other platform to go and do a demo for that.
Very well then. When we talk about development of a country, it's interesting that within Nigeria, it's almost impossible or difficult to hold conversations that involve subnationals. That's why you find that something could go wrong in a particular locality and they're blaming the president for it. I want you to harp on the importance of subnational governments to national development.
So take the United States. The United States is still an experiment as a nascent nation. I think it will soon be celebrating its 250th anniversary as a nation. It's still a work in progress. Every American president continues to say that. So the journey of a nation takes a long time. That's one. Two, it's important to bear in mind that the history of the United States was that you had a number of loose, almost republics, if you like, that were actually molded together to form a nation, to give the federal government a lot of power, but to leave a lot of residual power in the hands of the states. So a particular governor in a particular state, whether it's in the Midwest or in the Northeast, doesn't give a hoot who the president is. He knows exactly what to do because the Constitution gives him substantial powers to do what they want to do. But more importantly, don't forget this. If you give power to a place or a person in an area where people are not educated, like you and I had discussed earlier before this interview, unless you have a very enlightened citizen that actually knows his own rights and his contract with state actors, what you might have is just somebody who will be riding roughshod over people. So it's important as a synchronon to ensure the citizen is very, very enlightened, the voters are educated, they know exactly the nature of the contract between them and their leaders, and that they can demand for action and accountability. And then in the final analysis, if they mess up, they can actually remove them from office. So that is by way of a backdrop. Very importantly, in my view, we need to spend a lot of money on educating the public. That is so crucial and so critical. Along with that, to empower them economically, to have self-confidence and to become independent and to become vocal so that they can collectively use a megaphone. Under those circumstances, you can then devolve a lot of power to the states so that they can govern themselves properly and responsibly.
As we wrap up this conversation, as I have been doing with all the guests with regard to national development, we can look back at 65 years and say they've come and gone. But we can always ask ourselves what lessons we've learned from 65 years of the slow pace of development. Some would say we've retrogressed. In the coming years, what would you like to see with regard to development for Nigeria?
I think the single most important variable for me is leadership. A leadership that is extraordinarily visionary, that is very, very strong, that goes to bed at night and wakes up in the morning thinking about nothing but the welfare of the Nigerian people, day in, day out. And that has the courage and the conviction to assemble a bunch of extraordinary people who think and act like that leadership to deliver to deliver prosperity to Nigerian people, and to feel so envious enough that he wants to put Nigeria on the map as a major power in the emerging market, as a tiger in the emerging markets. Unless you have that leadership, then I think it's going to be a very long, hard road. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it will be very long and hard.
Absolutely. I mean, when you look at other countries like Dubai, you just know that leadership can provide a pathway for any nation.
That's what it is, yes.
Mr. Hayatudeen, I'd like to thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much.
It's interesting how 1 hour has gone by so fast.
Indeed, yes.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
And we'll be back to talk politics. You know, we're entering the political season. I hope you'll be ready for the political
When the time comes.
We're ready for you because we have not forgotten.
As a citizen,
we have not forgotten that you wanted to be president at some point. So
that was that.
We'll come back to you, but thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Well, we've been speaking with Mr. Mohammed Hayatudeen. He has over 40 years of experience in various sectors, banking, oil and gas, you name it. He's a former presidential aspirant as well, and he's an economist. Well, if you'd like to catch this interview and more, please go to YouTube and search Political Paradigm, or you could simply go to channelstv.com. Thank you for your time. I'm Terry Ikumi. Goodbye.